Welcome to the History of European Theatre podcast, and thanks for joining me on this journey through millennia of theatrical history. Episode 147, The Divas' Gift, a conversation with Pamela Allen Brown. One of the generally accepted facts about the theatre in the time of Shakespeare and Jonson is that boy actors took female roles and women were banned from appearing on the stage. This is, in fact, only partly true, and my guest for today's episode has made a study of how early modern actresses, from traditions on the European continent, influenced the English stage. During our conversation, we covered aspects of European theatre from the early 1500s and Commedia Dell'arte in particular. You will find my take on these things in Season 3 of the podcast, and if you have already listened to that, hopefully some of the names will still sound familiar. We also talked about the influence of actresses on playwrights and plays from the period, and hopefully you'll remember Lilly and Marlowe and Kid and the Spanish tragedy from Season 4 of the podcast. All of those episodes are still out there on your podcast feed if you need a refresher. Pamela Allen Brown is Professor Emerita of English, University of Connecticut. Her monograph, The Divas' Gift to Shakespeare's Stage, Agency, Theatricality and the Inamorata, was published by Oxford University Press in 2021. With Julie Campbell and Eric Nicholson, she edited and translated Isabella Andreini's Lovers' Debates for the Stage, the other voice in early modern Europe. Previous books also include Better a Shrew Than a Sheep, Women, Drama and the Culture of Jest in Early Modern England. She has co-authored As You Like It, Texts and Context, and Women Players in England 1500 to 1650 and Beyond the All-Male Stage. She is a founding member of Theatre Without Borders, a working group of scholars of early modern transnational drama, and she recently joined the New Books Network as a podcast host. You can find out more about her work at her website, which is www.pamelaallenbrown.com. I've put links to that in the show notes and on the guest page of the podcast website. I think the first point we really need to clear up and be very clear about is that were women ever formally banned from the professional London theatre?
Well, no. No scholars ever been able to find a document, regulation, or law. So it has become a sort of truism of Shakespeare or early modern drama studies to say that women were banned, but it's not really backed up by any evidence. So there's a sense that that somehow law changed with the Restoration and Charles II bringing, decreeing there was a change when at the Restoration when Charles said any plays that are put on now must use actresses in women's roles. Now I don't have that citation, but that sounds like there was a previous ban, but there wasn't. So it's really a matter of custom and long-standing tradition in the professionally organized player companies for males, for for boys all the way from 12 on up into their 20s to play women's roles of various kinds, right? So that the all-male stage is not a legally constituted entity, if you know what I mean.
And do you think from your research that comes out of religious convictions or something more of a social order?
There's so many theories about it. My own is kind of an all the above mix. The main theories, the main arguments that have been made are that it was use of the boys was because they were trained and they could memorize and sing, and a lot of them had been choristers, as you probably know. That there was the high literacy, already trained from childhood for the kind of performance that they were most focused on especially the voice, the boy's voice, right? That would transmit femaleness, right? But the high literacy, absolutely important, right? With low literacy in England, when you talk about UK here, so we have a much lower literacy for women and girls. So that's one thing that's set forward. It's sort of like the education mode, and that they're pre-existing but that also before there were professional player companies organized in London, um, there were traveling troops and there were other kinds of companies. And traditionally, there's a phrase called three men and a boy, where the traveling players would have a boy to play the women's roles. And in many kinds of festivities, many kinds of organizing. What what we have found, though, what my co-editor Peter Perel and I found in doing a book back in 2005, a book of essays, which is about all kinds of playing around, and not the professionalized, but around London and really in the streets as well, is that many women and girls played and performed. So our book was called Women Players versus Women Actors or Actresses, because to take away that sense of the professional more as what playing is. Acrobatics, playing is singing in the streets, playing is work is being the May Queen in a festive drama. Also, playing is performing in a court mask. At the highest rank of society, you have women performing. You have Elizabeth performing, going out on her summer progress. She's talking back and forth. She's always on stage. We princes are set on stages. No, you're not that. Elizabeth is always on stage, right? So, and also her court ladies also perform. So we have Elizabeth, we have Anna, and that's at the top of society. At the bottom, we might have a woman, a couple and their trick horse performing on the streets, right? It's kind of the gypsy model. And so we have this, but we also have parish plays in which there are actual roles and scripts and lines that are performed in spheres that are outside the all male professional stage. So the idea of who perform, when we talk about all too often, it is very strictly about the professional companies in London and and of course their traveling troops that went out from the professionals also went traveling. But we have the revision of the history that's come out, that female performance is actually well known and prevalent, and even the preponderant, the dominant mode was for women to be part of performance culture. Okay.
Mm.
So the specific creation of an all-male stage that was professionalized with these really quite talented boy actors, some of them, was a way of saying we're selling this as more elite form of performance, that is a more educated and better trained, and you're going to get better acting from these boys and men playing together, right? So you're not going to get also obviously the playwrights who are writing are Shakespeare, Webster, Kidd, Jonson, right? So we have this professionalization and this sort of assertion of that the all male is better, it's superior, right? Than this female space out there.
Yes, those are complex ideas to try and get our head round and put ourselves back into somebody's mindset from that period, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting. I come to it through studying jesting. My dissertation was on joking and ballad singing, very popular entertainments, right? Where everyone participated. Women told jokes, women laughed at them, women ran alehouses where there were jokes plastered on the walls in form of ballads. People sang ballads together. So I come from already from the concept of women performing in public space. And so when you go to someone, maybe, going back in my research, but before I was so interested in the Italians and the transnational, I was looking at how women's laughter and joke telling was a kind of performance that was reflected in the way that comedies especially were written, and things like, characters were very funny, female characters, comic characters like Beatrice and, Much Ado. um where did that come from, this
Mm.
joke telling witty woman who can give and get as give as good as she gets, right? So they're not just targets of misogynist humor, um, tellers and satirists against sort of male hypocrisy, sometimes against wife beating. I found all these jokes about that, and that was my first book, "Better a Shrew Than a Sheep," which is an early modern proverb. And so, I guess that led me to Europe, because a lot of jokes that you may know this already, um, in joke books and in the kinds of things that these are flowing across borders. It's like, we think about folklore, right? Folklore and folk tales not restricted by borders at all. Um, a lot of, for example, the Arthur story, like we talk about, the Celts,
Mm.
talk about, the French Arthur. Anyway, so when you go to the joke universe, it's vast and very and variable, but there's a ton of Italian novella humor that gets boiled down and gets transferred to England, that flows into English culture. And so I was really interested in that. The novella, the shorter novellas, and the joking that goes on, something. So that led me to think about more like where I was going to look at the continent after finishing my Better a Shrew. And also at women performers there, because I heard a little bit about women, about actresses, and I thought, oh, actresses, that's an interesting
Mm.
idea. What about these actresses? I don't know anything about them. And also, whenever you're in a field, I was in Shakespeare studies, gender studies, right, and feminist studies of Shakespeare and his world and other playwrights. I also was very interested in Jonson. When you realize that there's a topic that it's very hard in Shakespeare studies to get something that no one's really heard about. That's a
Absolutely.
new thing. So I decided to try to get grants and do the research in Italy and in America at various archives, and that led me to this book called The Diva's Gift. So that was a long trail that came out in 2022.
Yes, clearly a very profitable trail, because what you're suggesting in your book is that European visiting troops that included actresses really had a significant influence on the English stage, even though females weren't performing, apart from when they visited as part of a troupe from overseas. So where were they
Yeah,
coming from? Italy,
yeah.
you're
Okay.
suggesting?
Well, before the development of the professional troops, like before the opening of the globe, let's just, or, of the theater
Hmm.
in London. Okay. The decade before, in the 1560s, there had already been professional troops of traveling players in Italy, which we later came to be called the Commedia Dell'arte. At the time, they just called them the comici, or the players.
Mm.
They called each other the comici. But the professional players versus the academic players were elite, and they performed in academies, okay, and they were all male. The academy theater, which was what we call it, the literary playwrights for the academies, did use males for women's roles. In the traveling players in the Commedia dell'arte, they at first used males for women's roles,
Mm.
but that's where women first appeared, and that was in the 1560s that we have the first record
Mm.
of a woman in a professional troupe, who was paid, and she had a contract, and that was, I believe, 1564. So when we get this, sort of breakthrough moment, it's a decade, 1574, until we get records of Italian troops with women traveling in England.
Okay.
Okay. But they
Hmm.
do come. And I'm glad that you set it up that way, because the idea of, that how could they have known about it was the question that was that faced me over and over in writing my book, right? How did they know? How could they have known? And so I had to establish various means of information flows across the borders, right? Um, and and as often happens, diplomatic channels are really important. I'm sure you've come across this, that when you're talking about cross-border theater, about breaking down the national barriers in a sense intellectually or in terms of history, who goes back and forth? Diplomats, right? Merchants, right? And actors.
Yeah.
So these and writers, some writers. So in the sense of who and how they knew, the first group were diplomats who had watched Italian troops at the French court. So this is early on, early 1570s, 77, 1570, 71 is the first time that the troops from Italy went across the Alps and came to the French court to play. Okay, so the French they developed strong. They were a hit in Paris, put it that way. So we have the court in Paris, and we have English diplomats, including Lord Buckhurst, who's Thomas Sackville. We have Philip Sidney a bit later. We have people writing back and talking to Elizabeth and reporting on the Italian actors they saw. So, and in very positive terms, Philip Sidney says they're better than the English, and the English should learn from them. To paraphrase,
yes. Which isn't, again, not what you normally hear about what's reported about English actors. It's usually how brilliant they are, isn't it?
Sidney said that they're lacking in decorum, which the English will not, with the Italians will not err in, and decorum not meaning being decorous, but fitting the action to the plot, really,
right? Yeah,
generically. And so we have he's saying we have such a mingle-bangle mishmash in England, and the Italians they created a plot. When let's just say he was there later than this period I'm talking about. It's early 1570s, and it's amazing how quickly the Italians come after Buckhurst reports back. Buckhurst and his friends, other diplomats who are there, write back and say, we really liked it when the king took us for special shows with these Italians who were really talented. Again, I'm paraphrasing. So soon after, Elizabeth, who is, you probably know, an Italophile, of all the languages she knows, she prefers Italian. And she loves, for example, Tasso. She memorizes Tasso. There's a close relation between the early, most important troupe, the Gelosi, and Tasso, because their diva, one of their famous divas, Vittoria Pissimi, plays in Aminta, Tasso's Aminta. So soon we see a troupe, and it has it's not clear which troupe, but a troupe comes to England and plays for Elizabeth and plays her summer progress. So there's records, this historical of playing a pastoral and comedies as she goes from place to place. In Reading, I think, was where the pastoral was. So we have this very important contact because the Italians were leaders and groundbreakers with Aminta, for example, in pastoral. So it seems that, and Robert Henke says, a scholar that I have learned so much from, that it might even have been a version of Aminta that was played for Elizabeth. Right. So we have this is 1574, and so when we like in tracking this, there are other records in documents of like pairs or trios of Italians performing in London. The next big troupe that comes is the Martinelli troupe, and there are documents 75, 76, but the most important one is that they come for a 6-month period, the Martinellis, and they're coming right as the theaters are opening, right in that period. They're playing at court and in the city. They're playing the city and the Liberties. That's what the document says. And they play at court. So we have this long period where there's a whole troupe, and the troupe is probably 10 to 12 people with actresses in London. So my thesis, I look at that and I look at some later visits, but that is the most important. So this is when everything is just breaking open, obviously,
Mm.
you know, the
Yes.
doors of the theater and then the club, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to we're seeing like people like Lilly and Marlowe who are writing Kid is so this is where I'm saying this major impact where seeing them in person is happening, right? If you're in theater in London, you're going to go see them, I think.
Yeah.
um, and so that's where we have a alteration in the ways that leading female roles are written. And I'm saying so these are Italianate roles. And I make a definition of what is this. The leading woman in love is called the inamorata in
Hmm.
Italian troops. You know, like everyone has their own fixed role, unlike the let's say Burbage, like a star in England in the London troops. The stars would play a single type for their lives until, especially that when the men got too old to play the lover, they might switch to
Yeah.
something else like the Capitano. Whereas the women played, they played a namorata, would play the woman in love if they were a diva, which I call the diva. The diva power was that she could play her entire life. She always would play the inamorata. She would switch to another older woman role. So, you know, we would, when we think about what the inamoratas are in English, let's say just Shakespeare, obviously Juliet, but also Cleopatra. Like you could go to an older woman, Cleopatra, but she's still a woman in love, passion, right?
Yeah. There's a thought.
Lady Macbeth is a woman with passion. Usually, she's played that way. These are specific and unique roles that are the leading, and there hadn't been this kind of role before the visits. So
Mm.
I'm, yes, you have to read my attempt to show this, but I'm saying that in the ways that the leading women in these troops created their own stardom were through the kinds of character traits we see in a Juliet or a Cleopatra. We're quite different, yet do have some similar traits. So the Namarata type is developing in English theater. And before Shakespeare, there are, of course, Lilly and Kidd, and Lilly and Kidd both show the impact in Lilly and Pastoral and Kidd with tragedy, especially with Spanish tragedy with Bella Imperia.
I think you can see with Lilly, who's writing more for courtly performances, that transition, if you like, copying Italian modes is probably more in his lane.
It's interesting though because Lilly is, I've always loved Lilly, and I think he like Shakespeare knows how to take a model and then to make it his own with an
Mm.
original kind and an adaptation that transforms. And the transformation that Lilly created a wonderful, it's a conceptually and artistically, he's using his boy players, right? He's a playwright because the children, that's what he had. He did not have an adult company.
Mm, yeah.
His plays were for children. And so the company of Paul's, for example, the children of Paul's, his boys had to play lovers, like male female lovers, right, in some of his plays. So they were, how to put it was much more forward on the constant knowledge of them as children, as boys, as younger, right? We don't have a Burbage and Juliet contrast, right?
Mhm.
A
Right.
13-year-old and a 25-year-old.
Yeah.
We have everyone is certainly under 16, probably,
Presumably, yeah.
Lily's company. So we have a way that Lilly, and I think it's fascinating that he shows over and over um, the meta theatricality of the boy actor's condition, body, and role as a subordinate, if you know what I mean, like as a
Yeah.
vulnerable subordinate, bringing that into the pathos of playing Lilly and Galatea, Galatea playing the two parts in Galatea, or many of his other plays, which have cross dressing, which have transformation, sort of magical pastoral. That there is a blending of the boy actor aura and presence, and you never forget it in Lilly, with this diva, I would say shell, but the
Mm.
role itself is different. The role can be quite dynamic and powerful, right?
Mm.
Sappho and Phao. I never know how they ever said Phao, but Sappho and her lover, Sappho's Queen Sappho. So it's very much of a diva role, right? But
Mm.
she's obsessed with him, with this ferryman, and but she's quite, in my view, quite influenced. That role is quite influenced by the Italian actresses and how they
Mm.
play um, Greek mythological kinds of characters like this. They would play the queens. They would play you know, the goddesses. That's where diva comes from. Diva means goddess, of course. There is this, I think there's this overlay of the Italian role and the boy actor player, which you
Mm.
see in Italy.
So, and then on the other side of it, with Kid in the public playhouse, Spanish tragedy, clearly Bel Imperia falls into the same category, a queenly role.
I think it's interesting because here's an adult company. So in the Spanish tragedy, which is enormously influential, and it's been called the most popular and well-known play of the entire period. None of
Mm.
Shakespeare's comes even close.
So,
That people knew lines from it, and would repeat them well
mm.
into the 17th century. And it was just so, maybe Dr. Faustus is some kind of comparison, but Spanish tragedy just has so many offshoots and so much influence, right? Hamlet, of course, is one. So Spanish tragedy, you have a role, Bella Imperia. I don't think she's given enough attention. And I don't know how many times you've seen it. I mean, in England, it's performed much more than I can see it in New York. Bella Imperia is not given what the script does and what the basically the tradition of performing it. It's Hieronymo's play.
Yeah.
For most people, Hieronymo is the lead actor. Hieronymo is it's his drama and it's his revenge. Hieronymo's revenge, right? Yet in let me get on my hobby horse, but Bella Imperia has two revenges. She has Don Andrea, right? And then
Yeah.
she has Horatio. I
Oh,
mean,
yes.
she's
Yes,
loving
of course.
both.
Yeah.
She's
Mm.
a double avenger. She's also from the very beginning, from the wonderful induction and the part in hell or in underworld. Don Andrea sits down with Persephone, I think it is, Queen of the Underworld, and she promises him that he's going to see his revenge. So he sits there and watches the whole thing, right? Wonderful, wonderful frame, melodrama frame. So, and that Bella Imperia is going to give him his so it's it's to me the central role of the Avenger, because she then later has to nudge and prompt and push Hieronymo, who's just deteriorating into mad grief
Mm.
and not doing anything, to, come on, we need to do this. Are you not going to try to get revenge for your son? So Bella Imperia is quite her agency, her autonomy are so, there's nothing else like her previously that I can find in English drama, or not really in Italian drama either, or Spanish or French. She's a really unique character, and she has rankled critics. Lots of people have put her down as a shrew, as a this or that's too
Yeah.
aggressive, as a witch, as whatever. So she's just bent on blood. She's so bloody minded. It's like, yeah, she's like, so I think she's this great, and she's also very witty. She's much smarter. She outsmarts her brother. She outsmarts those who are trying to imprison her, off her, and she's married off, right? She's married
Yeah.
off, but at the end, haha, she kills her groom, right, on
Mhm.
stage in front of the King of Spain. And so she's a truly, if you think about all of the star scenes she has a balcony scene, she has a love scene, and then which is ended with the murder of Horatio. It begins with this very coy back and forth with Horatio, and then they come in and murder him. She's dragged off screaming. By the end, she has this fantastic death scene.
Mm.
So this brings me to this term star scene, which we all use. We don't know what a star scene is, but I would have to say, in terms of female performance, if you think about the star scene of opera, for example, um, star scenes were, you would have to have a great player to rise to the challenge of a star scene, right? So this puts a lot of pressure on the boy actor of Bella Imperia or any other great role like Cleopatra or Juliet or Portia, right?
Yeah.
That you have a series of scenes in which they are central and they must really deliver, right? And so when these start to be written by male playwrights for all male stages, you think, huh, did the boys suddenly get so much better than they were?
Well, yeah.
What was pressing this development? And that's where my book asserts and argues that it was the rivalry, competition, emulation with the Italians who had these great divas, and that it was a strategy to, it's kind of blunt to say keep women out, but to keep up, to say we are as good as or better than
Hmm.
those whorish foreign women. And that's where you start getting the thinking about these are all whores, and they're
Yeah.
just they only know how to do farces, and they play very vulgar comedies.
Mm.
This is the kinds of things that you hear from like Thomas Nash, and uh even Thomas Haywood has a put down of the Italians as just being farceurs. They don't know how to write like a wonderful history play like we do, or write a tragedy. And so it's that's where we get to the point of where modern, probably, because I know you've done other ones on the Commedia dell'arte, as influential as it is, today you face, we do who study it, the idea that they were just improvisers, and meaning
Mm.
just improvisers, meaning, well, we don't have records of, you know, yes, they may have been great actors, but we really can we only have scenarios, right? And we
Yes. Yeah.
don't have written plays, but that turns out not to be true either. Some of the, like, she's always called the greatest actress of the Renaissance, Isabella Andreini,
Mm.
wrote a pastoral when she was quite young, and it was a sellout. I mean, she had sold out. It's called La Mirtilla. It was kind of very influenced by Tasso. So, and Mirtilla was played. She played it. She wrote it. She was a literary genius as well as a great actress and musician, and singer. And so she had all of it going on, right? And she also created a persona that was conscious, always conscious of trying to purify the very lowly and whorish reputation of actresses. From the beginning, they were attacked by the church as prostitutes.
Mm.
They were on stage selling themselves, but you could have them afterward, right? Or they were getting money for displaying themselves. So it's kind of like what we might think of as a stripper, right? So they get that kind of, they could not be respected in any sense. This was something only a very a fallen woman would do,
Mm.
right? So this was the initial response in Italy. There were lots of restrictions. For example, they couldn't play in papal states unless some cardinal specifically asked them to come in and play
Of
for
course.
him. They're interesting, right?
Yeah.
Um, there were sometimes rules, about having to travel actually, this is not in Italy, but in Spain and France, about being married. There
Right.
were professional actresses in Spain and France too. So these rules about having to be married to be able to perform. Sometimes they're like, no, you can't cross dress anymore. You can't wear breeches. I mean, there are all of these
Mm.
ways of trying to restrict the attractiveness, the glamour, the sensuality of these women on stage, which is the very new and appealing marketing, for these troops. It was it quickly enabled them to both make more money and be able to play different kinds of plays and write them. In the Commedia dell'arte, in a couple of the troupes, there were writers who have left behind plays, full plays. They also played commedia erudita, which are scripted
Hmm.
plays. People like Richard Andrews and Robert Henke have written about how literate the Commedia dell'arte were and how they did the main roles, especially memorized and performed these plays. So there is a real gap between, what the average Shakespearean actually knows and thinks about Commedia dell'arte and what was the case and what's the best scholarship shows. So that was something else my book had to take on. Like who are these extremely literate, women? Where did they come from, and how can they have been known to Shakespeare?
Mm. Was it possible to find out much about their lives beyond the fact that they were famous in their time? And I think to an
I
extent,
think
we think probably also had some control over the troops. They were either the owners or were actually the leaders of the troop, albeit maybe through a male.
well, it's interesting that we found more. There's a wonderful new book out called The Theater Couple, by Serena Laena, and that concerns Isabella's son and daughter, Giovan Battista Andreini and Virginia Ramponi, and this is early 17th. This is 17th century, but it's very much about who leads the troupe. Like there's
Mm.
this great diva, Virginia Ramponi, whom Monteverde used to premiere Ariana, for example. I mean, she's this great opera singer as well as actress, and she is the diva. She's the star of the troupe, and Giovan Battista is the playwright player. He plays a lover, and he on stage, and he writes many plays that are very famous. Actually, and there's even a theory that his play L'Adamo, Adam, inspired Milton in part for
Mm.
Paradise Lost. So Andreini, Giovan Battista is well known to theater scholars of Italian culture anyway, and but his wife was far more famous, and actually Serena Leona shows was the leader, in the sense that when a duke wanted to employ them or was negotiating, the records of letters show that they might write to Giovan Battista but say, and please have your wife answer. You know what I mean? And then
That's a
she would
giveaway.
make the deal. Yes, yeah, that she was the one who really ran the troop. In terms of the previous troops, there were other troops that were led by one woman alone, like Diana Ponti. She was like the group of Diana, right? So they would be known by the woman's name who led them. So the women quickly became, as they emerged in the 1560s, 70s, some of them definitely became leaders of their troops, did the negotiations, decided things. So there was this sort of topsy-turvy. It had been all male troops with usually the Pantalone and Zane leading, or the character, the actor who played them would be one of the leading roles was Pantalone, right? Also, there were great dottores and capitanos. However, so then, and there were love stories, but they had males playing in masks, and so they were much more farcical. They couldn't play something with more pathos or greater sort of Petrarchan love talk, until the women came. We don't have any records of them playing for an emotional response that was deeper. And when the women came with no mask, right, and that developed the lover role as well, so that needed
Hmm.
the male lover. So the male and female lover, the innamorati, the lovers, became, voila, this advent of an extremely important new character shape that where dramas were written for that, and started centering especially the comedies, the love comedies, focused on those lovers. And so it's, this changed both erudita literary drama and Commedia dell'arte improvised drama. So they're scripted and unscripted, focused on the lovers. So when we think about it, and I do think something like Romeo and Juliet very much shows this model. We have the nurse, which comes all the way. The nurse is a very ancient character, but it's very important in Commedia dell'arte. and the nurse is in Romeo and Juliet, right? It's a character system, it's called. So we have the father, the angry father doesn't want her to marry who she, that's a typical plot device, or what Louise Clubb would call a theatergram, which is a whole collection of theater structures with which you build a play, kind of like
Right.
Legos.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, you have the father angry opposed to who she wants, and then you have the nurse who aids, who helps her. Of course, Shakespeare turns that around and make quite a darker character by recommending bigamy. So we have also we have so many wonderful scenes in Romeo and Juliet that you can look at Italian drama, both comedy and the more tragic comedies, like the fake death, like she takes the drug and fakes her death.
Mm.
That's a standard trope or theatergram in Italian comedy and tragicomedy. And that brings me to the point that the Italian professionals, the Commedia dell'arte, did do tragicomedy and sometimes tragedy. So that the diva had and you couldn't have had that when you had women in masks. You didn't have that love-centered, like in Greek tragedies, Tanya Pollard and others have shown, the tragedies that were played in Italy were the vast majority female tragedies. Get the name, like Medea, the name of the Hecuba. So the first tragedy written by a woman in England, Joanna Lumley, was Iphigenia. So we have these great tragic roles, like, right, that are also played by the divas, right?
Yeah.
So there's this lovely in the most elite genre, the tragedy. We also have as I was talking about with Bella Imperia, we also have this influence of the actress. I think that there was, once I started trying to the other means of communication and competition really is that you have the court in which Elizabeth is bringing in players from the professional stage, and before the professional stage, there's the times before that there are English troops playing for her even before the rise of the professional stage, which were all male. Okay, so when the Italians come, after they come, we have Italian musicians. We have various ways for Italian theater to be communicated, right, through word of mouth to both the court and to the professional stage. So I started looking at how many actors and writers went to Europe and came back and reported or wrote very much about Italian actors, right, or actresses. And so I ended up, it was a very long list. It's not just, it's Sydney, there's George Whetstone, there's so many people who go back and forth. Haywood, Johnson spent some time in France. Marlowe probably went to France. It's very highly likely he traveled in France. So there is this back and forth that comes through actors. The most famous travels through France and Italy was William Kemp, clown in Shakespeare's company, and he was a star. He was as important probably as Burbage. Okay, so Kemp went and had a tour with early on with Sydney, and then he goes back and has his own tour with a boy. He just goes and he travels around and he performs. And so he comes back, and there's a whole play called The Travel of the Three English Brothers, in which Kemp appears in a very famous scene in Venice, and he asked to perform with Harlequin and his wife. So there's this whole scene where Harlequin and his wife, never named or anything, come on, and they have a back and forth thing where they're preparing to play a scene. He said, well, let's improvise the way you do here in Italy, right? And so there's this means for the flow and the knowledge about actresses to come. And I guess I think I also found a really wonderful pamphlet by Robert Greene. In the pamphlet, it's like Robert Greene wrote, it's called Francesco's Fortune, in which it is clearly Isabella and Francesco Andreini, the couple who were the leaders of the Gelosi for a while. So it's very much about, like, the story that's in there is about him leading a troupe of actors. He leaving his wife Isabella in England, and she's accused of doing something. She has to go to trial, and she speaks at a trial. She writes poetry. She sings. He's in a troupe traveling around, and he's a courtesan attracts him and takes all his money. So this plot, this kind of awareness, I think, is also comes through other print sources that I show. So I think there is a pressure to be different from the Italians, and I think that's probably the best I can do about why did the stage stay all male. We are I think what they are showing, that their theater is different and more, I don't say it's more purified, but it doesn't have the taint of female performance. So the way that some plots and plays treat theatrical Italian women or foreign women is showing them as either very whorish or not competent as actresses. So there's this pushback in that way to satirizing this model. So it's a defensive mechanism, but it's a marketing mechanism too, to say our boys are really great and we have these starring boys who can play these great roles.
My thanks to Pam for taking the time to talk with me. Her book, The Divas' Gift to the Shakespearean Stage, goes into even more detail and is available from her website and from wherever you get your books. Next time, the Ben Jonson life story continues with the most successful phase of his career and the innovative publication of his collected works in a folio edition. In the meantime, please join the Facebook page or group, or find the podcast on Instagram or X, just to keep up to date with new episodes and other theatre-related things. There's also now a Blue Sky account for the podcast if X is no longer your thing, so please give the account a follow there and say hi. If you do feel able to help out with the costs of running the podcast, then please head over to Patreon, where you will find additional content for a small monthly fee or a one-off donation. You can also make a one-off show of support through Ko-fi.com. I look forward to your company next time, but if you do have any comments or concerns in the meantime, you can contact me by email at thoetp@gmail.com or through the website, where you can leave me a voice message by clicking on the microphone icon, or you can write to me on the contact page. That's all at www.thehistoryofeuropeantheatre.com.